The stars above New Eden had always looked peaceful. For 30 years, humanity's first colony outside the solar system had grown from a small outpost into a thriving world. 2 million people called it home. They built cities and farms. They raised families. They looked up at those peaceful stars and believed they were safe. They were wrong. Admiral Jack Morrison was eating dinner in his quarters aboard the carrier Starfall when the distress signal came through. He dropped his fork and ran to the bridge. The message was broken and filled with static, but the fear in the voice was clear. Someone was screaming about ships in the sky, about fire falling from above, about creatures taking people away. Then the message stopped. Morrison ordered his fleet to move at maximum speed. 12 ships pushed their engines beyond safe limits. Every minute felt like an hour. Every crew member prayed they would arrive in time. They did not. When the Starfall dropped out of faster-than-light travel above New Eden, Morrison felt his heart stop. The beautiful colony he had visited just 6 months ago was burning. Smoke rose from every city. Ships he did not recognize hung in orbit like vultures over a corpse. The alien vessels fled when they detected the human fleet. Morrison wanted to chase them, but he knew his duty was to the people below. He sent shuttles down immediately. He hoped they would find survivors hiding in bunkers or forests. Commander Kate Sullivan led the first team to touch ground. She was a veteran of 3 conflicts and had seen terrible things in her career. Nothing had prepared her for New Eden. The streets were empty. Not a single body. Not a single person. Just abandoned vehicles, dropped belongings, and silence. It was as if everyone had simply vanished. Sullivan walked through neighborhoods where breakfast still sat on tables, where toys lay in yards, where doors hung open as if people had left in a hurry. Her team searched for 6 hours. They found no one alive. They found no one dead. 2 million people had disappeared completely. Then they found the processing center. It was hidden in a warehouse near the spaceport. The aliens had built it quickly, using their own technology. Sullivan and her team stood at the entrance for a long moment before going inside. What they found would stay with them forever. The Vractori did not kill their victims quickly. They kept them alive for harvesting. Human bodies contained chemicals and compounds that the Vractori considered valuable. The processing center showed exactly how they extracted these resources. Some of the equipment still had blood on it. Sullivan recorded everything. Her hand shook, but she kept the camera steady. The galaxy needed to see this. Everyone needed to understand what had happened here. Back on the Starfall, Admiral Morrison watched the footage in his private quarters. He watched it 3 times. Then he sat in the dark for an hour, thinking about the families he had known on New Eden, the children who had called him Uncle Jack, the young couples just starting their lives, all gone. Taken like cattle to be processed for parts, Morrison sent the evidence to Earth with a simple message. He requested permission to pursue the Vractori and recover any survivors. He believed humanity had every right to defend itself and rescue its people. Earth's government agreed. But they also followed proper procedure. They brought the matter before the Galactic Council, the governing body of civilized space. Surely the Council would support humanity's cause. Surely they would condemn this atrocity and help bring the Vractori to justice. The Council chamber was massive. Representatives from 47 species sat in a circular arrangement, each delegation in their designated section. Human Ambassador Claire Dawson presented the evidence. She showed the recordings from New Eden. She displayed the data about the 2 million missing people. She formally requested Council support for military action against the Vractori Dominion. The response was not what humanity expected. High Arbiter Zethikin, a tall creature with gray skin and 4 arms, spoke for the Council. He expressed sympathy for humanity's loss. He acknowledged that the Vractori had committed terrible acts. However, The Council could not support military action. The Vractori were important trading partners. Their biological products were used by dozens of species. War would disrupt the galactic economy. It would cause suffering for billions of beings across many worlds. The Council could not prioritize human grievances over galactic stability. Instead, the Council offered a different solution. Resolution 4471 would establish mandatory peace between humanity and the Vractori. Both sides would agree to cease hostilities. The Vractori would pay financial compensation to Earth. In return, humanity would abandon any plans for revenge. Dawson stood silent as the delegates voted. The resolution passed easily. Only 3 species voted against it. Humanity's allies were few. She returned to Earth with the Council's decision. The message was clear. Human lives did not matter enough. 2 million people could be butchered, and the galaxy would do nothing. The murderers would go unpunished because they were economically useful. Admiral Morrison received the news while still orbiting New Eden. He read the resolution 3 times. Then he gathered his senior officers in the conference room. He told them the truth. The Council had betrayed humanity. They had chosen money over justice. They had decided that alien trade goods were more valuable than human lives. But Morrison also told them something else. Something that would shape the next 5 years of human history. He said that the Council had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs. They would smile and sign the peace accords. They would shake hands with Vractori diplomats. They would play the role of defeated victims accepting their fate. But in secret, they would prepare. They would build. They would plan. And when the time was right, they would show the galaxy what happened when you hurt humanity and expected no consequences. Kate Sullivan stood at the back of the room. She thought about the processing center, about the blood on the machines, about the 2 million voices silenced forever. She had never wanted revenge before. She had always believed in rules and proper conduct. But standing in that room, listening to Morrison speak, she felt something change inside her. The Vractori had made humanity their prey. They would learn that humans were nobody's prey. They were predators too. And they had very long memories. Outside the window, New Eden burned in silence. A world that had once held so much hope was now a graveyard without bodies. A reminder of what the galaxy had allowed to happen. Morrison looked at his officers one last time. He saw the same cold determination in every face. Good. They would need that determination in the years ahead. The Council had ordered peace. But humanity had already chosen something else. They had chosen revenge. 5 years was a long time to pretend. But humanity had learned patience the hard way. On the surface, everything looked normal. Earth signed the peace accords with the Vractori Dominion. Human diplomats traveled to Vractori space and smiled for photographs. Trade agreements were negotiated. Cultural exchanges were organized. The Galactic Council praised humanity for their mature acceptance of Resolution 4471. Behind closed doors, the truth was very different. General Ben Carter had served in the military for 35 years. He had fought in wars on 3 different planets. He had lost friends, buried soldiers under his command, and carried the weight of difficult decisions. But nothing in his career compared to Project Midnight. The secret program operated from a station hidden in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Officially, the station did not exist. It appeared on no maps and in no databases. The people who worked there had said goodbye to their families without explaining where they were going. Many would not return home for years. Doc Carter stood in the main hangar and watched engineers work on the newest ship design. It was smaller than standard cruisers, but carried weapons that no alien species had ever seen. Human engineers had studied technology from every corner of the galaxy. They had taken the best ideas and improved them. They had invented new systems that broke what aliens believed was possible. The shipyards operated around the clock. Workers slept in shifts and ate at their stations. Every person there had volunteered after learning the truth about New Eden. Every person there had someone to avenge. Across the station, Dr. Lisa Park led a different kind of preparation. Her team worked in sealed laboratories where biological agents were developed and tested. Park was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. Before New Eden, she had spent her career creating medicines to heal people. Now she created weapons to kill them. She had studied Vractori biology for 5 years. She knew their bodies better than their own doctors did. The aliens had thick skin that resisted conventional weapons. They had redundant organs that let them survive terrible injuries. They had immune systems that fought off most diseases, but they also had weaknesses. Park found them all. Her team developed viruses that attacked only Vractori cells. They created gases that disrupted their nervous systems. They designed drugs that could be delivered through their food supply, their water, their air. Every weapon was precise. Every weapon was deadly. Park did not enjoy her work. She went to sleep every night, knowing she was building tools of mass death. But then she would remember the recordings from New Eden. She would remember the processing centers. She would remember that the Vractori had shown no mercy to 2 million innocent people. They deserved no mercy in return. Far from the asteroid belt, Captain Sam Reyes commanded the Ghost Fleet. 300 ships that officially did not exist, crewed by soldiers who had officially retired or died. They trained in the empty space between stars where no one would find them. Reyes was 42 years old with dark hair and a scar across his chin. His wife had been a teacher on New Eden. His 2 sons had been students at the colony's primary school. He had been on deployment when the attack happened. By the time he returned, there was nothing left to bury. He pushed his crews hard. They practiced combat maneuvers until they could perform them in their sleep. They ran simulations of every possible battle scenario. They studied Vractori tactics and found ways to counter them. The Ghost Fleet grew stronger every month. New ships arrived from the hidden shipyards. New soldiers joined after completing secret training programs. By the 3rd year, Reyes commanded a force that could challenge any navy in the galaxy. But they remained hidden. They remained patient. They waited for the signal that would unleash them. Back on Earth, families of New Eden's victims formed their own organization. They called themselves the Remembrance. They held meetings in private homes and rented halls. They shared photographs of lost loved ones. They kept the memory alive when the rest of humanity was supposed to forget. Maria Santos had lost her parents, her brother, and her 2 nieces on New Eden. She became one of the Remembrance's leaders. She was a quiet woman who worked as an accountant during the day. At night, she organized memorial services and support groups. The Remembrance served another purpose too. They were a network of eyes and ears across Earth and the colonies. They watched for Vractori spies. They reported suspicious activities. They helped identify humans who might betray Project Midnight's secrets. No one talked. In 5 years of preparation, not a single leak reached the Galactic Council. Humanity's secret remained safe. Admiral Morrison spent those 5 years planning every detail of the coming war. He met with Carter and Park and Reyes. He studied Vractori territory until he knew every planet, every station, every shipping lane. He identified targets and calculated timeframes. The plan was simple in concept but complex in execution. Human forces would strike fast and hard, appearing simultaneously across Vractori space. They would destroy military assets before the enemy could respond. They would disrupt communications so the Vractori could not coordinate their defense. Most importantly, they would search for survivors. Intelligence suggested that the Vraktori kept some captives alive for extended harvesting. There might be people from New Eden still breathing somewhere in that alien territory. Finding them was the priority. Kate Sullivan visited Morrison's office one evening during the 4th year. She had spent her time training special forces teams for ground combat. She had become harder and colder since New Eden. The young officer who once believed in rules had become something else entirely. She asked Morrison if he ever doubted the plan, if he ever worried they were becoming monsters themselves. Morrison thought about the question for a long time. Then he told her that he did worry. Every day. But he also remembered the children in those processing centers. He remembered the families torn apart. He remembered that the galaxy had told humanity to accept it and move on. Some things could not be accepted. Some things demanded a response. Sullivan nodded. She understood. They all understood. The 5th anniversary of the New Eden massacre approached. Across human space, people observed a moment of silence at the exact time the attack had begun. They lit candles and spoke the names of the dead. That same night, Admiral Morrison sent a coded message to every hidden military installation. The message contained a single word that would change galactic history. Tomorrow. In the asteroid belt, General Carter ordered his engineers to begin final preparations. In deep space, Captain Reyes assembled his captains for their last briefing. In her laboratory, Dr. Parks sealed the final shipment of biological weapons for transport. On Earth, Maria Santos and the other members of the Remembrance gathered in a large hall. They did not know the military details, but they knew something was about to happen. They held hands and prayed for success. 5 years of silence was ending. 5 years of pretending was over. 5 years of building and planning and waiting had led to this moment. The Galactic Council believed humanity had accepted defeat. The Vraktori believed their prey had surrendered. They would all learn the truth very soon. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Starfall and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, his enemy waited without knowing what was coming. Somewhere out there, human captives might still be alive and praying for rescue. He had made a promise over New Eden's burning cities. Tomorrow, he would begin keeping that promise. Humanity was done being peaceful. Humanity was done following rules that protected murderers. Humanity was ready for war, and the galaxy would never forget what happened next. The Vraktori had conquered 17 species in their history. They had built an empire on blood and suffering. Their warriors were feared across the galaxy. Their ships were powerful and their tactics were ruthless. None of it mattered. Admiral Morrison watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Starfall. His tactical display showed 3,000 human ships moving in perfect coordination. They had practiced this moment thousands of times in simulation. Now they executed it for real. The Vraktori defense fleet scrambled to respond. They had nearly 2,000 ships protecting their homeworld. Under normal circumstances, that would be enough to repel any attacker. But these were not normal circumstances. Human missiles launched in waves. They were not the standard weapons that alien species used. Dr. Park's team had designed warheads that released biological agents on impact. The agents attacked Vraktori nervous systems, causing chaos on any ship they penetrated. Crews lost coordination. Weapons failed to fire. Engines went dark. Captain Sam Reyes led the Ghost Fleet into the heart of the enemy formation. His ships were smaller and faster than the Vraktori cruisers. They darted between larger vessels, targeting critical systems with surgical precision. Shield generators exploded. Communication arrays went silent. The Vraktori fleet began to fragment into isolated groups that could not coordinate their defense. Morrison had expected the battle to last days. It lasted hours. The Vraktori fought bravely. They were not cowards, whatever else they might be. Their warriors died at their posts rather than surrender. Their commanders tried every tactic they knew to turn the tide. But humanity had prepared for everything. Every Vraktori strategy was met with a counter. Every strength was turned into a weakness. By the 8th hour, the defense fleet had lost half its ships. By the 12th hour, only scattered survivors remained. They retreated to the planet's surface, hoping to regroup and continue the fight on the ground. That was exactly what Morrison had planned for. Commander Kate Sullivan waited in a dropship with 300 Marines. She had trained her team for 5 years. They knew every detail of Vraktori architecture and biology. They knew how to move through alien buildings and how to fight the large, powerful warriors they would face. More importantly, they knew why they were fighting. Every Marine had lost someone at New Eden. Every Marine carried that pain like fuel for their determination. The dropships fell through the atmosphere like a rain of fire. Vraktori ground defenses tried to shoot them down, but human electronic warfare systems blinded their targeting sensors. The ships landed hard in open fields and city squares. Marines poured out before the dust settled. Sullivan led her team toward the primary objective. Intelligence had identified a massive facility on the northern continent. It was heavily guarded and highly classified. Human analysts believed it was a harvesting center, possibly holding survivors from New Eden and other conquered worlds. The Vraktori defenders were waiting. They stood nearly 8 feet tall with thick gray skin and 4 powerful arms. Each one carried weapons that could tear through standard armor. They roared challenges as the humans approached. Sullivan did not hesitate. She gave the order to attack. Human weapons were designed specifically for Vraktori physiology. Armor-piercing rounds found gaps in their thick skin. Explosive charges targeted their redundant organs. Gas grenades released compounds that attacked their respiratory systems. The aliens fell by the dozens, but they took humans with them. Marines died screaming as Vraktori blades cut through their armor. Others were crushed by powerful hands or torn apart by enemy fire. Sullivan watched friends and colleagues fall. She kept moving. She had to reach the facility. The battle through the complex took 4 hours. Room by room, corridor by corridor, humans pushed deeper into the alien structure. Vraktori defenders fought to the death. They knew what the humans would find inside. They preferred death to facing judgment for it. Sullivan's team finally reached the central chamber. What they found there was worse than anything they had imagined. Thousands of containers lined the walls. Inside each container was a living being. Humans, members of other species. All of them connected to machines that slowly drained resources from their bodies. Many had been there for years. Some were barely recognizable as the people they had once been. Sullivan found survivors from New Eden. Not many. A few hundred out of 2 million. But they were alive. They had endured 5 years of horror, waiting for rescue that they had stopped believing would come. She knelt beside an elderly woman, whose eyes were clouded and unfocused. The woman whispered a question. She asked if this was real. She asked if she was really being saved. Sullivan took her hand and told her it was real. She told her that humanity had come for them. They were going home. The old woman smiled and closed her eyes. She died a few minutes later, her heart giving out from the shock of hope after so long without any. But she died free. She died knowing her people had not forgotten her. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. Human teams assaulted every harvesting facility they could find. They freed captives from dozens of species. They documented everything they found. The evidence would be shared with the entire galaxy. Admiral Morrison received reports throughout the battle. The casualty numbers were heavy. Thousands of humans had died in the fighting. Many more would carry wounds and trauma for the rest of their lives. But they had achieved their objectives. The Vraktori homeworld had fallen. Their military was shattered. Their harvesting operations were destroyed. The survivors they had kept alive for years were finally freed. Captain Noah Grant commanded the task force that captured the Vraktori Leadership Council. His daughter had been 9 years old when New Eden was attacked. She had been in the 3rd grade. She had loved painting in animals and making up stories about space adventures. Grant looked at the alien leaders huddled in their chamber. They were trying to negotiate. They offered treasure and territory and promises of future cooperation. They offered to reveal the locations of other harvesting facilities. They offered anything the humans wanted. Grant thought about his daughter. He thought about the processing centers. He thought about the containers filled with living bodies being slowly drained. He told the Vraktori that they could keep their offers. They had nothing humanity wanted except one thing: justice. The war was not over yet. Other Vraktori worlds needed to be secured. Other facilities needed to be found. But the decisive battle had been won. The Dominion's heart had stopped beating. Back on the Starfall, Morrison allowed himself a moment of quiet. He stood alone in his quarters and looked at a photograph of New Eden before the attack. Beautiful cities under alien stars. 2 million people who had trusted the galaxy to keep them safe. Most of those people were gone forever. Nothing could bring them back. But the survivors were free. The guilty were being punished. And humanity had proven something important to the galaxy. They were not victims. They were not prey. They were a species that protected its own, no matter how long it took and no matter what it cost. Morrison put the photograph away and returned to the bridge. There was still work to do. There were still battles to fight. The war had taken 11 months so far. He did not know how much longer it would last, but he knew how it would end. The Vraktori Dominion would fall. Their empire would be dismantled. Their ability to harm others would be destroyed forever. Humanity had made a promise over New Eden's ashes. They were keeping it. The war lasted 11 months. When it ended, the Vraktori Dominion existed only in history books. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Starfall as the final enemy stronghold surrendered. The last Vraktori military commander had held out for 3 weeks in a fortress on a frozen moon. He had refused every offer of negotiation. He had promised to fight until death. In the end, he chose to live. He walked out of his fortress with empty hands and knelt before the human soldiers waiting outside. His warriors followed. They had no more fight left in them. Morrison felt no satisfaction watching the surrender. He felt only a deep exhaustion that had been building for 6 years. Since that first distress signal from New Eden, since he had seen the empty streets and the processing centers, since he had watched the Galactic Council choose trade over justice, it was over now. But the cost had been enormous. 20,000-3,000 human soldiers had died in the war. Countless more were wounded in body and mind. Ships had been destroyed. Resources had been spent. Humanity had poured everything into this campaign of revenge. The Vraktori losses were far greater. Millions of their warriors had fallen. Their fleet was gone. Their economy was shattered. But Morrison had given strict orders from the beginning. Humanity was not here to commit genocide. They were here to destroy a threat and free its victims. The Vraktori species would survive. They would live under close monitoring for generations. Their military would never be rebuilt. Their harvesting technology would be destroyed. But their civilians, their children, their future would continue. Some humans disagreed with this mercy. They wanted the Vraktori wiped from existence. They wanted every last member of the species to pay for what had happened to New Eden. Morrison understood their anger. He felt it himself, but he also knew that becoming monsters would not honor the dead. 2 million people had been murdered. Their memory deserved better than being used to justify another atrocity. The cleanup took months. Human teams traveled to every Vraktori world, searching for hidden facilities. They found 17 more harvesting centers. They freed nearly 40,000 captives from 12 different species. Many of them had been held for decades. Some had been born in captivity and had never known freedom. Humanity helped them all. Medical ships provided treatment. Transport vessels carried survivors to their home worlds. Counselors worked with those too traumatized to function on their own. It was expensive and time-consuming, but Morrison insisted on doing it right. The rescued beings spread stories across the galaxy. They told other species what the Vraktori had done to them. They described the harvesting process in horrible detail. And they praised the humans who had finally stopped it. The Galactic Council watched all of this with growing unease. Ambassador Dawson returned to the council chamber 6 months after the war ended. She walked to the same podium where she had announced humanity's declaration of war. The same delegates sat in the same seats. They looked at her with a mixture of fear and respect. She reported that the campaign was complete. The Vraktori Dominion had been dismantled. All captives had been freed. Monitoring stations were in place to ensure the Vraktori could never rebuild their military power. Humanity had accomplished everything they set out to do. Now they wanted to discuss the future. High Arbiter Zethakin spoke carefully. He acknowledged that humanity had achieved a remarkable military victory. He admitted that the Vraktori had committed terrible crimes that the Council had failed to address. He even offered something close to an apology for the Council's handling of the original crisis. Then he asked what humanity wanted now. Dawson smiled. It was a warmer smile than before, but still carried an edge of steel. She told the Council that humanity wanted simple things. They wanted to be respected. They wanted their citizens protected. They wanted a galaxy where murdering innocents had consequences. She proposed a new agreement. Humanity would remain part of galactic civilization. They would trade and cooperate with other species. They would follow reasonable rules and contribute to common goals. But they would also maintain the power to defend themselves and their allies. They would never again rely on the Council to protect them. And they would act independently against any threat to their people. Regardless of what the Council decided, the delegates debated for days. Some wanted to reject humanity's demands. They argued that accepting such terms would undermine the Council's authority. Others pointed out that humanity had just defeated one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces. Rejecting their terms might have serious consequences. In the end, pragmatism won. The Council accepted humanity's proposal. A new era in galactic relations began. Admiral Morrison retired a year later. He had served long enough. He had carried enough weight on his shoulders. It was time to let younger officers lead humanity's military. He bought a small house on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was quiet there. He could sit on his porch and watch the waves and try not to think about all the things he had seen and done. Commander Kate Sullivan visited him sometimes. She had retired too, though she was younger. The war had taken something from her that she could not replace. She needed time to figure out who she was without the mission driving her forward. They would sit together and drink coffee and watch the sunset. Sometimes they talked about the old days, about the campaigns and the battles. Sometimes they talked about the people they had lost. Most times, they just sat in comfortable silence. One evening, Sullivan asked Morrison if he thought it was worth it. All the death, all the destruction, all the years of planning and fighting. Did it accomplish anything real? Morrison thought about the question for a long time. Then he told her about a letter he had received the week before. It was from a woman who had been rescued from a Vraktori harvesting facility. She had been captured as a child from a different colony, decades before New Eden. She had spent most of her life in those containers, being slowly drained, waiting for death. Now she was free. She had a small apartment in a city on Earth. She was learning to read and write. She had made friends. She was thinking about the future for the first time in her life. She had written to thank him, to thank everyone who had fought. She said that she had given up hope long ago. She had accepted that she would die in that facility without anyone knowing or caring. But humanity had come for her. Strangers from a species she had never met had risked their lives to save her. They had shown her that the galaxy was not as cruel and empty as she had believed. Morrison finished telling Sullivan about the letter. Then he answered her question. He said that he did not know if it was worth it. He did not know if the scales balanced. He had done terrible things and ordered terrible things. He would carry that weight until he died. But somewhere out there, a woman who had known only suffering was now experiencing joy. Children who had been born in captivity were growing up free. Species that had been prey for generations were finally safe. Maybe that was not enough to justify everything. Maybe nothing could be. But it was something. It was proof that the universe could be changed, that evil could be stopped, that people who seemed powerless could become powerful if they refused to give up. Sullivan nodded. She understood. On New Eden, the rebuilding had begun. New colonists arrived every month. They built homes on the ashes of the old ones. They planted gardens and opened schools and started families. In the center of the main city, a memorial stood in a quiet square. It was a wall of black stone, 50 feet tall and 100 feet wide. 2 million names were carved into its surface. Every person who had been taken, every person who had not come back. At the base of the wall, a simple inscription was carved in large letters. We remember. We returned. We prevailed. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the memorial. They stood before the names and tried to understand what had happened here, what humanity had lost, what humanity had done in response. Some called humans heroes. Others called them dangerous. Many simply called them a species that should not be provoked. Morrison did not care what they called humanity. He cared only that his people were safe, that the dead were honored, that the survivors were free. He sat on his porch as another sunset painted the sky in orange and red. The war was over. The mission was complete. The future was uncertain but hopeful. He was tired. He was old. He was ready for peace. But if anyone ever threatened his people again, he knew that humanity would respond. They would rise together. They would fight without mercy. They would do whatever was necessary to protect their own. That was the lesson they had taught the galaxy. That was the legacy of New Eden. Never again. Never forgotten. Never defeated. The stars above Morrison's house were the same stars that shone over New Eden. The same stars that had witnessed humanity's darkest hour and its greatest triumph. He watched them twinkle in the gathering darkness and finally allowed himself to rest. The Galactic Council chamber was full when Ambassador Claire Dawson walked to the podium. Representatives from 47 species filled the circular hall. Translators hummed as they converted her words into dozens of alien languages. Cameras recorded everything for broadcast across the galaxy. Dawson was 38 years old with short brown hair and steady hands. She had been a junior diplomat when New Eden was destroyed. She had watched the original presentation of evidence and the Council's shameful response. She had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. She stood at the podium and said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched until delegates began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Then she pressed a button on her console. The chamber's massive display screens came to life. They showed New Eden before the attack. Beautiful cities, green forests, children playing in parks, families gathering for meals. 2 million people living their lives without knowing what was coming. Then the images changed. The screen showed the aftermath. Empty streets, abandoned homes, the processing centers with their bloody equipment, the recordings that Kate Sullivan's team had made. Every horrible detail was displayed in sharp clarity. Some delegates looked away. Others closed their eyes. A few left the chamber entirely. But Dawson did not stop the presentation. She made them watch. She made them remember what they had chosen to ignore. When the images finally ended, she spoke. Her voice was calm and clear. She told them that 5 years ago, humanity had come to this chamber seeking justice. They had presented evidence of an atrocity. They had asked for help punishing the murderers and rescuing possible survivors. The council had refused. They had ordered humanity to accept peace with their enemy. They had valued trade over human lives. Humanity had obeyed. They had signed the accords. They had smiled at Raktori diplomats. They had followed every requirement of Resolution 471, but they had not forgotten. They had not forgiven. And now, the time for pretending was over. Dawson announced that humanity was withdrawing from all peace agreements with the Raktori Dominion. Effective immediately, a state of war existed between Earth and the Raktori. Human military forces were already in position throughout enemy territory. The chamber exploded into chaos. High Arbiter Zethang rose from his seat and demanded order. His forearms waved frantically as he called for silence. When the noise finally died down, he addressed Dawson directly. He told her that this was madness. Humanity could not simply declare war without council approval. There were procedures to follow. There were regulations to obey. The Galactic Council existed to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral action. Dawson smiled. It was not a friendly smile. She reminded the High Arbiter that humanity had followed procedures 5 years ago. They had obeyed regulations. They had respected the Council's authority. And the Council had told them to accept the murder of 2 million people because the murderers were economically useful. She said that humanity had learned an important lesson from that experience. The Council's rules only protected those who were powerful enough to be useful. Everyone else could be butchered without consequence. So humanity had decided to become powerful enough that no one would ever ignore their people again. Delegate after delegate rose to condemn humanity's action. The Fourth Confederation threatened economic sanctions. The Celestial Hegemony suggested military intervention. The merchant guilds announced they would cease all trade with human worlds. Everyone had something threatening to say. Dawson listened patiently to each speaker. She took notes. She nodded at appropriate moments. When they finished, she responded to their threats one by one. To the Fourth Confederation, she explained that humanity had already diversified their trade relationships. Sanctions would hurt, but they would survive. To the Celestial Hegemony, she pointed out that their military was designed for defense, not offense. They would not risk their ships in a war that did not concern them. To the merchant guilds, she reminded them that human manufacturing had become essential to dozens of products. They would find it difficult to replace Earth's output. Then she told them something that changed the atmosphere in the chamber completely. She said that while they had been talking, human forces had already surrounded the Raktori homeworld. 3,000 ships had appeared simultaneously in their home system. The Raktori were already under siege. The chamber fell silent. Completely silent. 47 species stared at the human ambassador in shock. Zethikin finally found his voice. He asked how this was possible. Human military forces had been monitored. Their fleet movements had been tracked. There was no way they could have assembled such a force without detection. Dawson explained that humanity had been very careful. They had built ships in secret locations. They had trained crews in deep space. They had hidden their preparations from every spy and censor in the galaxy. For 5 years, they had worn a mask of acceptance while building the sword that would cut their enemy down. She told the council that humans were patient when they needed to be. They could wait years or decades for the right moment. They could smile at their enemies while planning destruction. They could endure insults and injustice until the time came for payback. And when that time came, they were merciless. A delegate from a minor species asked what humanity wanted. Perhaps some compromise could be reached. Perhaps the council could negotiate a settlement that satisfied everyone. Dawson shook her head. She said that humanity wanted very simple things. They wanted every Vractori military asset destroyed. They wanted every human captive returned safely. They wanted the Vractori Dominion to lose the power to ever threaten another species again. The council could help achieve these goals, or they could stay out of the way. Those were the only options available. Zephikin made one final attempt. He warned that the council would remember this day. Humanity would face consequences for their defiance. The galactic community would not tolerate a species that ignored the rules. Whenever it suited them, Dawson looked at him with cold eyes. She said that humanity would also remember this day. They would remember which species had condemned them and which had remained silent. They would remember who had threatened them and who had offered understanding. And they would remember, forever, that the council had forced them to seek justice on their own. Every death in the coming war, human and Vractori alike, was partially the council's responsibility. They had created this situation by refusing to act when they should have. She gathered her notes and prepared to leave. Before stepping away from the podium, she offered one final thought. She said that humanity had tried being peaceful. They had tried following rules. They had tried trusting the galactic community to do the right thing. It had not worked. Their people had been slaughtered, and the galaxy had told them to accept it. Now they were trying something different. They were being strong. They were being feared. They were being the kind of species that others thought twice about attacking. The council could call them monsters if they wanted. The council could condemn them in speeches and resolutions. But the council would never again make the mistake of thinking human lives were cheap. Dawson walked out of the chamber. Behind her, delegates argued and shouted and threatened. But none of them moved to stop her. None of them announced they would send ships to help the Vractori. They were afraid. Good. Halfway across the galaxy, Admiral Morrison received confirmation that the diplomatic phase was complete. Earth had officially declared war. The council had been informed. Now came the part that would determine whether 5 years of preparation had been enough. He looked at the tactical display showing his fleet, surrounding the Vractori homeworld. 3,000 ships waited for his order. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers prepared for battle. Morrison gave the command. The war had begun.